little something for the ladies. Now, I'm also available on alternative social media, on MeWe, James Desborough, all one word, on Minds, Grimachu. I'm no longer on Gab. I've deleted my account because it's even more exhausting than Twitter. Oi. This is going to meander a bit, and it's really just going to be me talking. I'm not going to do anything funky with the visuals, probably. But I kind of have a whole bunch of slightly interrelated stuff I need to get off my chest. And this is prompted by a video that Jeff Holiday did. Got a lot of time for Jeff, good bloke, love him, love his family, much respect. But he did something I agreed with in a way that perhaps I didn't entirely agree with. Jeff made a video about Stefan Molyneux, the YouTube philosopher and trend gadfly, and there's a lot to criticise there, just as there is with Garepi and others like those. And Molyneux has attached himself lamprey-like, in part, to the men's rights movement. Now, most of what he said, Jeff, I agree with, but there is an aspect to it that I don't. He trotted out the freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences line, and that always massively aggravates me, because if you use that as the standard, then even North Korean citizens have free speech, but they don't have freedom from consequences. You can say whatever you like in North Korea, you just might get strapped to an anti-aircraft gun and blown into shreds for doing it. So technically you can say that you have free speech, but you don't have freedom from consequences. If I put a gun to your head and say don't say anything or I'll blow your head off, you can still choose to say something, so you have free speech but not freedom from consequences. What happened to Charlie Hebdo after their cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad was consequences. So consequences, free speech is speech that is free of consequence, and it's not just limited to government interference or whatever else. And this is something that's being increasingly and massively encroached upon, in particular by private interests like YouTube, like Twitter, like Facebook, and even by like other companies. Your choices, your freedom of expression is being increasingly encroached upon by corporate entities as well as governments. There's one ludicrous example I saw just the other day. A friend of mine on Facebook, he's had a letter from management telling him your car is out of date and not well kept. It's not in keeping with the image of the company. We've looked into our records. We see that we're paying you enough that you should be able to afford a new car. Please do so. Your car is yours unless it's a company car, which it isn't. That's your choice. That's your expression, how you want to spend your money. But the company seems to feel that it is entitled now to tell you what you can drive, what activities you can do online. The girl who raised lots and lots of money for the Australian bushfires by selling nudes has been banned from all manner of social platforms, even though she wasn't selling or transmitting the nudes on those platforms. They've decided to ban her for activity off that platform, right? Even more than free speech, I think that the right to a private life is being eroded. The segregation of your personal life and your work, your online life and your work, and so on. And there needs to be a reinforcement of that delineation. What I do on my own time has fuck all to do with the company, and anything I do off a platform has nothing to do with my activity on that platform. You should only be held accountable for what you do in that particular place. Right, if I want to dress up like Hitler and spank midgets on a weekend, right, I shouldn't be banned from Facebook or Twitter or fired from my job for doing that, right? It's nobody's business but mine, if that extreme, bizarre thing is what I'm into. Which kind of brings me on to the parts that I did agree with, but also ties into the same problem, because men's rights issues, yeah, they are a thing, They are a real thing. There are all sorts of men's issues that are real and serious. Circumcision, sentencing gap in prisons, the big and increasing difference in lifespan between men and women, medical provision for men, mental health provision for men. And, you know, as someone with mental health issues who has been going through the system here in the UK, I've been made acutely aware of just how utterly inadequate the whole system is, particularly when dealing with men. There's so many things, real, genuine, pressing issues, but if you speak up or speak out on men's issues, or God forbid, identify yourself as a men's rights activist, you're likely to face censorship, social censure. You'll be painted as a Nazi or a misogynist or whatever else. Now, I don't call myself an MRA, in part because of that, in part because increasingly I see in the men's rights movement, which I guess I'm kind of adjacent to, and I'm friends with people who are involved in it, and I've got a lot of time for some of them, like Elizabeth Hobson, like the Honey Badger Brigade, and so on. A lot of them are really good people. Many, even most of the issues that they bring up are important, but if you identify that way, you're likely to face many problems in your life, because it's seen as this wacko, fringe, misogynistic thing. But I don't call myself an MRA, in part because of those issues, in part because I see the same problems in the men's rights movement that I see in feminism, which are why I no longer call myself a feminist, and haven't since about 2010 or so, right? So that's why I say I'm an egalitarian with a particular interest in men's issues, if anyone asks. So why am I not an MRA? Why am I not a feminist besides those things? It's because both of them have become angry, bitter, increasingly petty, rage-filled, angry movements. Some of that anger can be justified on both sides, some of that rage can be justified on both sides, but it's unhelpful. And what I'm interested in is equality and fairness for all people, not grudge matches, right? No, I'm not interested in fighting for men specifically. I want everyone to be equal as much as is possible. Everyone to have the same opportunities, before anyone jumps on my phrasing there. Everyone should have as equal as possible a chance to get on and succeed in society, and the law should treat us all equally. It should be blind. Lady Justice should be blind, and she's not. So I'm not a feminist because most of that kind of legal equality that we're talking about has been accomplished, and the social side is working its way through, and because feminism has become increasingly vindictive, about revenge, not justice, about treating men poorly, about attacking men, attacking masculinity, controlling media, censorship. The sex negative wing is very much at the tiller of the feminist movement right now, and I'm sex positive, so I'm against all of that. And then you see those same things in the men's rights movement. There's a rise in traditionalism, in vindictiveness, in bitterness, in arguing about very petty things, though they are noticeable, such as media representation and so on. And there's a lot of hypocrisy in both movements, feminism and masculinism, for want of a better word. The men's rights people, the sort of men in general, get cast in feminism, particularly radical feminism, as this oppressor class, and the supposed oppressor cannot possibly be on the receiving end of prejudice or hatred or whatever else. You know, that sexism. But that is in and of itself sexism. The idea that men can't experience sexism is itself a sexist trope, and they're using this privilege plus power definition, which is complete hogwash. I know this is a bit and it's not even hyperbolic, but it sounds it. I know comparisons with, you know, Nazi Germany and so on are trite and usually end a discussion right there. But if you look at the propaganda aimed at the Jews in the run-up to World War II and since, in white supremacist movements and so on, it's weird, it's unusual. Yeah, anti-black propaganda tends to show them as subhuman or animalistic, or in that kind of way. But the anti-Semitic material, even if you look at the things like the mural that was brought up so much in the recent election campaign about Labour, conspiracy theories and propaganda about the Jews cast them in the light of this kind of hyper-competent conspiracy in control of the world. Yeah, it casts them not as subhuman, but as superhuman oppressors, conspirators behind all manner of plans and so on. And feminism, at least radical feminism, when it speaks of patriarchy, casts men in this role of this oppressive conspiracy of geniuses, which just doesn't seem to marry up to reality at all, as far as I can see. But so, negative propaganda it doesn't have to be saying someone is bad or awful or stupid or animalistic or subhuman. It can go the other way and be just as dangerous, if not more dangerous. Okay, so that kind of brings us back to what Jeff was talking about. He was talking about Stefan Molyneux. Now, he's this YouTube celebrity cod philosopher. I never have much time for philosophers. He used to be a bit more tolerable when he was more anarchistic, though it was more sort of libertarian anarchism. And he has this cultish way about him to kind of draw people in and get them to listen to him. And the thing is, he doesn't really seem to have any core set of principles that he's operating on. He tells people what they want to hear. He shifts and moves his position gradually, which is to his credit, I suppose, because it's not as obvious that he's doing it. But he shifts wherever the money is, wherever the activated, disaffected group is. So he started as this kind of libertarian anarchist, kind of piggybacking a little bit on the atheist and skeptic communities. Then he started shifting a bit to the men's rights stuff in a fairly gentle way, and then more recently he's latched on to this kind of civilizational, the West, traditionalistic, masculine, fascist apologia, and scientific racism, right? This is not a guy you want speaking for you, and that is another reason I don't consider myself to be an MRA, because I don't want these people, the ones that get the most attention, speaking for me on men's issues, because they're terrible, just like I think many of the people who speak out on feminism or race issues are terrible themselves, or trans issues. Activists often seem to be the most obnoxious people imaginable, and not the kind of people you want to listen to, really. And Stefan is definitely one of those, and I think he's a user and abuser. One thing I think we should learn from Gamergate is that even when someone is on side and putting out the correct message, they might be looking to exploit you in the way that Milo did. You know, they're just looking for a buck. They're looking for an audience that is so desperate to be heard and understood and publicized that they will put up with anyone or anything in order to do so. And Stefan certainly attracts an audience. Some of what he says isn't outrageous, a lot of it is. I don't think he's useful to the movement, speaking as an outsider. Mike Buchanan is another one. He's the head of the Justice for Men and Boys party over here in the UK, and he is a weird crank. And he is always trotted out to talk about men's issues on TV shows and so on. A lot of what he says, again, is reasonable, and then suddenly he'll spin off in some weird way or do something that looks really bad and makes anyone who's interested in men's issues or tries to bring up legitimate men's issues, looks like they're on board with him and his nonsense, and that's massively counterproductive. I'm sure he's a nice enough guy. I think his heart's in the right place, but intermingled with his more progressive and accurate views. There is all this weirdness. He will always put his foot in his mouth at some point in any interview or discussion that he's on, and suddenly seem like a sexist that's been teleported from a Carry On film or something like that. He's not useful. Similarly, Philip Davies, MP for Shipley, who has been pushing for discussions in Parliament on International Men's Day, somewhat successfully, and for which I'm grateful. But this is not someone I want speaking for me. Many of his political views are utterly obnoxious, and it took facing off with Jess Phillips, who is even more obnoxious, to make him look good. He wants discussions on men's issues. Great, International Men's Day is great venue for that, but the sheer hostility to him and a lot of his traditionalistic and very conservative views are singularly unhelpful. All right? We need progressive voices, liberal voices, left-wing voices for equality, not conservative voices who end up poisoning the well. It might be fallacious, but many people will look at Philip Davies and say this men's rights thing is bollocks, purely because of his political alignment. Paul Elam. Now, this is a tricky one, because I think what A Voice for Men used to do, which was to create essentially clickbait, outrageous headlines and articles that would attract people's attention, I think that was useful back in the day when there was much less awareness of men's issues and men's rights as an issue, as a problem. And the only way to get attention was to scream and shout and say controversial things, put clickbait headlines and so on, write outrageous articles in the hopes that people would come and read anyway and then be led onto something else. But these days, I think it's now at the tipping point where it's counterproductive. And Elam is a crazy looking dude. Not so much in conversation, but if you pause at any point where you see a still photograph of him, he's always got these wild bug-eyed stares. And yeah, that's petty, that's surface level, but it is an issue. And he does also tend to still be extremely aggressive in the way that he was. I think the honey badgers are a lot better, but there is a problem even for the more reasonable men's rights activists in that they are so isolated. They're basically locked within an echo prison. They don't choose to be there necessarily, but they are, where the only thing they hear is each other's opinions, and that becomes reinforcing, and some of the ideas and theories and so on that are propounded within their little sub-bubble are getting as crazy as some of the out there feminist ideas. And I don't think that's helpful, particularly to laymen and outsiders like me, but I have a great deal of time for the honey badgers. They do a lot of really good work. I'm just concerned that they might be on the same track to crazy town that Stefan Molyneux, Mike Buchanan, Philip Davies and so on are. Now, this conservative movement, this traditionalist movement, the scientific racists, the right wing, the sort of alternative tech sphere online that tends to lean right, this isn't a place where you would normally expect to find a civil rights movement, which is what a men's rights movement or a men's issues concern is. These are civil rights. These are things that can really only be tackled by governmental healthcare, changes to the law and so on. You have to go to the state for this. And if you're arguing for equality, your natural home should be on the left, right? But it's not. But being associated with the right wing, being associated with conservatives, being associated with traditionalism is another thing that has a massively deleterious effect upon the options and the opportunities for the movement, and it's not where it should be. And yet the left that we have at the moment is really quite small c conservative and very authoritarian. The right is a little bit more open, but I think in the long term they're unwilling to make the kind of changes, laws, intercessions, use of state power that would be necessary to give the men's rights movement what it needs, what it wants, to give men what they need, which is full legal equality again. Now, there's no doubt in the past men did have the upper hand, but I think things have very much shifted the other way. The idea of equality, of egalitarianism, of civil rights was always to raise everyone up to the same level, but now, as I intimated before, it's vindictiveness, it's revenge, and that's there in the men's movement, that's there in feminism, it's there in trans rights, it's there in, it's there in racial movements of all stripes, and this is just antagonistic. The argument shouldn't be so much against what other people have, what other people want, but for equality, and I think that is how eventually you build some kind of consensus. But it's so toxic that it's impossible even for reasonable, nice, fluffy lefties like me to even begin to do that, because the moment you bring up even genuine men's issues, like circumcision, like the sentencing gap, like the lifespan gap, like mental health, you're just instantly attacked by people, and in part it's because of people like Stefan, Mike, Philip and Paul. So I don't know what I've really accomplished at the end of this long meander, but I want to be able to speak out and campaign on these issues, and to do that I have to distance myself from men's rights, and occasionally I'm for women's rights, because I'm an egalitarian, not a men's rights activist. I'm an everyone's rights activist. But you never receive such vitriol and pushback as when you try to raise legitimate men's issues, and so they continue to go unaddressed, and so the men's movement continues to get more bitter, more twisted, more angry, because they're not listened to. And I think at the absolute bare minimum we should listen to people. People often complain that the men's rights movement doesn't do anything. Well, it can't, because it gets blocked at every turn, even at the stage of consciousness raising, by the many apparatus that already exist to do so. How do you break out of that? I don't know. I'd welcome people's ideas. Yeah, blame Jeff. Zhang. It's been called misogynistic, racist, a hate group, reactionary. It's been blamed for Trump, for keeping women out of games and technology. None of this is true. If you want the real story, then you need to buy Inside Gamergate.
Get you anything you want. You just have to talk to me. Talk to me. I'm your priest. I'm your shrink. I'm your main connection to the switchboard of souls. I'm the magic man. Santa Claus of the subconscious. You say it. You even think it. You can't have it.